He says, this wasn't even just an American movement anymore. Amazing changes were happening in Africa, where Ghana had won its independence a year earlier, opening the door to a black African liberation movement. And he goes on and talks about that. But then he talks about 1958. Dr. King had been stabbed while in New York, pushing for civil rights. He said a huge event that fall was a mass rally sponsored by the Nashville branch of the SCLC. Dr. King himself was scheduled to speak, but just before the event, he was attacked in New York at a book signing for his just published book, published Stride Toward Freedom. A woman stepped out of the crowd gathered around him at a Harlem department store, pulled a letter opener and stabbed him in the chest, shouting, "I've been after him for 6 years. I'm glad I done it." Dr. King nearly died from that attack. He goes on to say, his wife, Coretta, came to that SCLC rally in Nashville, taking Dr. King's place as a keynote speaker. I had never seen her before, and I was struck, not just by her beauty, but by the pure grace of her presence. She was captivating, the way she stood, her hands cupped as she talked about the boycott days in Montgomery. And she sang all along on the stage, spirituals like Still Away, and There's a Great Camp Meeting in the Promised Land, and some slave songs. She recited a poem or two as well. And then he goes on to say, each Sunday that fall, I attended services at the First Colored Baptist Church. Before it became First Baptist Church, Capitol Hill, it was the First Baptist Colored Church. Its roots went back to the 1830s, to slavery, when the blacks sat in the upper balcony while whites sat below, just the way the movie theater in Troy was shared when I was growing up. The seminal moment in the church's history was the day in 1873 that First Baptist black congregation, most of them former slaves, jubilantly marched out of that balcony and down the street to a brand new church they had built for themselves. Frederick Douglass came to speak there, as did many other black leaders during the course of the next half century. By the 1950s, First Baptist had established itself as a church of choice for the upper crust of Nashville's black middle class. Students and faculty from the surrounding universities, doctors, lawyers, private businessmen, and women all filled the church's old wooden pews each Sunday to hear the words of one of the most impressive speakers I'd ever listened to, the Reverend Kelly Miller Smith. This man was not a whooper. He was dignified and sophisticated, an intellectual who made his case with very reasoned, very compelling arguments. And then he goes on to say, like Dr. King, he was committed as much to the needs of the community around him as to the disposition after death of the souls of his congregation. When a group of Southern black leaders gathered in Atlanta early in 1957 to form what would become the SCLC, the Reverend Smith was there. And when, a year after that, a Nashville branch of the organization was created, Kelly Miller Smith became its first president, writing in the chapter's initial statement of purpose. If we are to see the real downfall of segregation and discrimination, it will be because of a disciplined Negro Christian movement, which breaks the antiquated methods of resolving our fears and tensions and dramatically applies the gospel we profess. It wouldn't be long before the Reverend Smith acted on those words, offering his church as a staging area for the waves of student demonstrators who would eventually topple the segregated barriers of downtown Nashville. And in doing that, he opened the doors to students, and also Reverend James Lawson, who came here to teach the students about the nonviolence movement. So I'm gonna stop there, and if you have any questions, but I know you have to go on with the panel discussion, but you're welcome here anytime. I can't say the doors are always open, but they're open most of the time. And so you're welcome tonight. we have a group of people downstairs who are feeding some unhoused men. And during the winter months, they come in on Tuesday nights, get a meal, and get to stay overnight. So thank you all. Thank you, Ms. Watson.
Thank you, Dwight. When I talked to Reverend Smith, I said, okay, we need somebody to talk about the history of this church. It is tremendous and it is deep. And this church is deep in civil rights history. And a lot of people don't know that. They just know that there's some place called First Baptist Capitol Hill. Well, tonight we have another pastor around, and I'm going to introduce him. He also is at a church that has a history of being an activist church. And therein lies this notion of Dr. King's legacy. It is not just the students, it's the activist churches and people who attended those churches who made a difference in the Nashville movement. And we need to understand and know that. There's going to be numerous names. I might ask you, do you know? If you don't know, I'm going to suggest that those of you here and those of others take some notes and go find out who they are. There are people who have brought us this far, some of whom names you don't know. Some of them were members of this church, of Jefferson Street. They were students. They were seniors. They were people who were the difference between jail and going home in the evening. Women and men of all walks of life. So I think we need to just recognize that being a hero is not always being out front. And working for justice does not mean that you're always in the light. It is so many more behind the light and working to make sure that community is a real place where everyone is treated with respect and honesty. Well, we have a couple of leaders today. Let me introduce one. Javante, I haven't heard from. He could be stuck in traffic. He is a student at Lane College, and he is the president of the NAACP Youth and Youth Programs. So hopefully he might make it. He may not. I haven't heard from him. But I just wanted to acknowledge that we had been in contact, and I was expecting him to come tonight. If you don't know Javante, he's on the internet, all over the place, and he is a leader at Lane College and a leader in NAACP issues in this state. So I just wanted to do that before we got started with the two people who are here. Reverend Dr. Aaron X. Marble is the pastor at Jefferson Street Missionary Baptist Church. He is the senior pastor there. It is a church loved by Christ to love like Christ. Pastor Marble holds a BA and an MBA from Xavier University and a master's in divinity from Cincinnati Christian University. He's a member of several organizations, including the IMF, and he serves on our planning committee. So thank you for saying yes when I called you. He's a member of the NAACP, and he also is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, which is Dr. King's fraternity. Prior to his pastorate, he worked in human resources, bless your heart, and provided consultation to 3 Fortune 500 companies. He is married to Lydia, and he is a proud parent of 2 daughters, Noel Grace and Eden Joy. Our second panelist has been here before. So she's pretty experienced on this thing, and we did this streaming last year. And she was fabulous, continues to be fabulous, and continues to work on a lot. Adrian is a local writer from Nashville, Tennessee, who serves as a member of the Mayor's Youth Council. Leadership has no age. You can be a leader any place at any age. And as a journalist for a nonprofit organization, Project Connect Nashville. I heard her tell Dwight Lewis she'd been doing it for, 8 years, Adrian?
That was for my school. I've been writing for my school as a contributor for 8 years.
8 years. And then she does Project Connect. So this is what's happening. People are doing these things and making a difference at any age, and that's what we're really talking about. She attends Davison Academy, engages in local activism, public speaking, creative and governmental communications. In addition, they are representative students of Stonewall, an LGBTQ advocacy group presented by the Oasis Center that engages, teaches, and partners with additional nonprofits to encourage the advancement and protection of LGBTQ youth. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Reverend Marble, for being here. Let me start asking you a couple of questions. Let you all start talking so I can listen too. I got my pen to take notes. Uh, this year's theme is protecting the dream, confronting the assaults. Give me your assessments, and you all can add any flavor into what you're doing and those kind of things that are doing these, because it really is your story that we need you to tell us tonight. So talk about this theme, and also talk about what you're doing and what you're seeing. Why don't you start, Adrian?
Yeah, of course. So I think when it comes to protecting our dreams and confronting our assaults, that comes to so much more than just what is happening physically in society. I think that's more than what we see on the news. I think that comes so much from how we're raised and our mental state and our mental health. I believe that a lot of young people's initiative today is to invest in mental health along with that. Also, I believe a lot of assaults faced on a realistic basis do come from microaggressions. So I think a great concept that some of the teams that you mentioned that were trying to initiate within our community is that equity is prerequisite for equality, meaning that you cannot fully have an equally based society where everyone is expected to have the same just treatment without specifically investing in marginalized communities. And I think that's a great way that a lot of people try to move a push from, people of color to BIPOC. If you don't know what that means, that's Black and Indigenous people of color. But when it comes to personal experiences, I think it is very important to point out not just putting all of those quote unquote issues and putting all of those minorities just in one category, like this is the minority problem, this is the minority issue, when this is something that these assaults happen to all of us and everyday people, but they're also very specific. They're also very targeted in so many ways. And I think that's a great reason how in your life, if you have it could even be yourself, but if you know that you're facing something that is systemic from a marginalized community, some people push an initiative like, oh, this is a minority cause, or, this is something that all people of color go through. But we're seeing so many voices, especially young people, go, no, don't say that, just label me off as a person of color, even though you can choose to. But I am Black, I am African American. This is something that, this assault resonates with me and my community. And also that's very important when we talk about the LGBTQ community, knowing that unfortunately, in Nashville, we're seeing a rise in suicide rates of trans youth, not just saying, oh, this is an assault for the minority, this is an assault even for the LGBTQ youth. No, this is an assault that's targeting trans people. So I think when it comes to the assaults and how we progress from them, first, we have to realize that equity is prerequisite for equality, and then we also have to realize that they are specific and they harm people in specific ways that need to be addressed in detail.
Thank you. Here, here. Reverend Marble, you got to go behind that.
First, I want to say good evening and thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad to be here with my fellow panelists, and thank you to Capitol Hill for opening its doors for us this evening. I think that the theme for this year has two parts, and I think it's important to assess them both. First, we're protecting the dream, and that dream needs protecting because Dr. King's legacy has been stolen. He's been made into a cartoon character that is happy-go-lucky, loving, and misquoted by people who have ill intentions. When we live in a state that is actively assaulting what books we can read and information that is factual is being claimed to be fallacious and wrong, we have to protect that dream. And so I think the committee was excellent in selecting that theme because we need to reclaim Dr. King from a false narrative. He was a man of peace, a Christian, a preacher, a gentle person, great person, all of those stories that we hear. But he was a ferocious fighter against injustice and for his people, for the marginalized and for the poor, for black people. And I think it's important that we protect the seriousness of Dr. King and protect the sincerity of the fight he led, particularly what cost him his life. And that was as he began to engage and work with arenas surrounding economics and ensuring that black people not only had access to drink at the same water fountain, but then would have access to work at that same water company and be able to hold the same positions that white counterparts did, and breaking the cycle of poverty. And when that began to happen in union with other people that weren't black, when that began to happen with labor unions, when that began to happen with indigenous people and with Irish people and a host of other organizations that began unifying around those causes. So we need to protect that, because if we're not careful, we will lose the genuine image of Dr. King to lies. And then I think the other part is the assault that we are experiencing. My fellow panelists, I think, did a great job at articulating the microaggressions and the need to be specific. I think assault suggests strategic, that what we face in our community is not by happenstance. It's not a coincidence. There is a serious strategic machine that works not behind the scene, in front of our face, that creates assaults on our community. We live in a state with the legislature that is a clear supermajority, that is Republican, and that does not care about the concerns and the lives of black, brown, and poor people in our community. It's clear, it's evident, and we have to be courageous enough to speak to what those assaults are. I think that the addition to the assault is that it's unified. An army works better together. And the assaults we face are unified, are strategic, are calculated, and have been in motion. Jim Crow might have been defeated, but his son Jacob Crow is alive and well and has taken the worst of his father with the best of technology, the best of the power of the times, the best of the climate that we face. And we talked about the insurrection, and nearing that anniversary, it not only echoes in chambers across state houses in our country, but we see it internationally, that now it's fueled similar activities in Brazil and across the world. And so these assaults are strategic, they're unified, and it takes us being serious, being specific, and being courageous to address them.
As you think about the assaults and reflect on where you are in your work and what kind of things you are seeing and doing, whether it's development of others or teaching or speaking, talk to us a little bit about what you see as issues in your arena and challenges, and how others may face those and what you think can be done. Because I think a lot of times people look at it and go, I can't do that, it's too hard. Talk about that and talk about what makes you keep going.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting question, just because I spent a lot of my time in East Nashville, and then my parents did as well. And, like I said, I attend Davidson Academy. So I think one of the greatest concerns when you are trying to progress through change is when you live in an area and you come from a demographic where you know that there are certain lives that need to be invested in, but the majority, or what the media pushes as the majority, seems to not even have a lens into that perspective. And I'll give an example. Today, I know with the inauguration and the ceremony of Representative Jones, there was a different lens into we have to be realistic with the demographics of Nashville. And a question rose from that, and it was, where do you think investment should be the most prevalent? And for me, I think it takes, honestly, for like my age group, it takes for the private school goers in Springfield, Tennessee. It takes people, the Tennesseans from Saudi Daisy, and people even closer to us from White House, to be able, for them to have access to this type of media and access to these conversations, because I see that as such a prevalent issue, because even within the Mayor's Youth Council, I shed so much positive light on it. And I noticed that so many of our applicants even do attend MLK. They do attend Hume Fogg. These are already black, brown, indigenous, and white students who are very passionate about this cause. But at the same time, you know, they're 4 minutes from us. They're a 5-minute drive from us, and they're seeing these issues already historically in a place where the minority voice has been very important. But then you come to a question of, if that's the only regional representation that we're getting, how are we ever going to progress even within the legislative house when that audience isn't representative of not only just like everyone in our city, but it more reflects the ideas, the voices, the morals of those same communities in Springfield, Tennessee, in more rural areas. And you think about how that happens, and it happens from ignorance, even though we're seeing those people in power. But I think that there becomes a great issue within not having the media and not pushing the initiative of certain issues within areas where you're not in all the time going to be in the city. And I think one of our solutions to that would be, you know, a lot of people are on their phones all the time. We do so many things through media, but that comes from empathy. Not all the time is that the easiest to work through, just because some people experience so much pushback. But I do see that as a great issue, especially when you're talking about Tennessee, because Nashville is such a great example of a diverse community, and we continue to thrive and leave, but then we come back home with the question of, okay, we're pushing for liberal causes, and we're pushing not even just to throw the term liberal out there, but just for things that are progressive, that are for the rights of people who have not been invested in. But then we come back home, and then we see certain political figures represent Tennessee as this, you know, kind of 100% monolithic Republican state, when you have so many minority voices and causes. But that representation needs to be pushed to more rural areas. And Mayor's Youth Council, all of those teams are working for that, because that's very specific.
Yeah, I think, and I think starting off our evening with the history of First Baptist Capitol Hill was important. My life's work is committed to the black church. I think the black church and our HBCU institutions are our last institutions that are ours. I think they are our last institutions where we can be unapologetically black and free in ourselves. And they are the last institutions that we have that can help push for the liberation of black people. The challenge is that in my work, with my colleagues and in my space, is that we often use nostalgia as a strategy for present success, and that doesn't work. And I challenged Jefferson Street with this a couple years ago. How can our churches have pages of history but paragraphs of current ongoing activity? That we can sum up what we do now in a paragraph, but we got pages of what happened decades ago. And so we have to assess and take full evaluation in the church in the work that I do about how influential and how relevant we're being today. I think another challenge with the church is that we have risen to a level of apathy within our congregations. That, as I mentioned earlier, Jim Crow's segregation was in our face, and it impacted black people regardless of your wealth, your educational degrees, your profession. Segregation was an in-your-face enemy. I think Jacob Crow is just as violent, is just as aggressive, but in many of our sacred spaces, we have amassed some success, whether it be political or in our professions, and liberation for all of our people has become more difficult to obtain. And so even in the black church, which is a prophetic witness against classism, nepotism, and elitism, and some other things, when we really take a look at our congregations and our churches, we employ that within the four walls of our church while trying to fight it when it is under the apparatus of white supremacy. And so I have made a commitment with organizations like the IMF, state organizations like the African American Clergy of Collective of Tennessee, that we as black clergy have to educate ourselves, have to, because I'm going to say this and I'll move on. By default, everybody's not a Kelly Miller Smith Sr. or Jr. All pastors are not trained activists and organizers. But by default of our position, we oftentimes are placed in that role. And we have to be honest that we may not necessarily be equipped to do that. Not only equipped, but some of us really may not be interested in this work. And so clergy has to take those assessments, has to take on that action so that the black church can continue to be the prophetic witness it needs to be, because as a people, we will not move forward without that powerful institution being armed, led, and ready to engage in the work. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Sure.
Because you're young.
Sure.
It's not putting you up here because you have a vision and you're working on justice. So.
Yeah, I think in Matthew 9, Jesus is commissioning. I believe Jesus is the best example of a grassroots organizer you can find. And I don't think you have to be Christian to find principle and impactful lessons from the work and life of Jesus. But he's commissioned his 12 disciples to go out. He's still around, but they are to go out and carry out the mission and then come back and report to him. And he says, I need you to go out and help people because my people are like sheep without shepherds. They do not have leaders that are helping them as they should. And I flip that. I think the reason is we have shepherds who don't see sheep. That a shepherd who is leading people, loves them, cares for them, is sensitive to their needs. A shepherd doesn't want lamb chops or cashmere sweaters. A shepherd wants to see his sheep or her sheep survive. And I think one among many critiques of the black church is that I don't think all of our leaders have been sacrificial in the sense of protecting our people as a shepherd does their sheep. I think we have been We think proximity to whiteness, positions of power, knowing the DA or the mayor, getting asked to do a prayer breakfast by them, being able to call them. We think that's success. While there are masses of black people in our community who are unhoused, who have insecure housing, who live in food deserts, who are not making it. Gentrification has ravaged Nashville's historically black communities. And so I think if we're commissioned for change, if we're followers of Jesus, we have to look at the model of leadership he places before us and not just preach and teach about heaven and hell and a life hereafter, but be concerned about the life we live now. No need to preach a gospel to people about not going to hell when they're living in hell now, and we have nothing to say about the abundant life Jesus says we are to live. So I think that's a challenge that the church has to own and make sure it's corrected.
I agree with everything you just said. Oh my goodness. And I think from that, you mentioned leadership, and I think that's so prevalent, and I'll even use Nashville as an example. But when we think of success within the black community and we think of us having black-owned and black coordinated institutions, we do think of Nashville. We do think of our HBCUs here, our churches, because, we're in such a historic place. But at the same time, as you do, I draw so much inspiration from Christ. And I will repeat, I do not believe that you have to be of a certain a spirituality or religion to draw so much inspiration from arguably the best activist, advocator, civil rights person to just lead it at all. But I wanted to bring up the fact that when it comes to leadership, we have to be realistic with ourselves. And for so much of the black community, regardless of if we're Christian or not, you're taken to church. That's been a cultural thing for us. That not only is something that you can grasp in the spiritual realm, but you're taken to church. But it's okay, where do we go outside of that? How do we facilitate our lives outside of that? And it's so important to bring up the fact that we do tend to progress, but there are not many places you can go within the country where you have some of the main necessities for your community. I'll mention a black-owned hospital, black-owned grocery stores, where we have our own schools and institutions, and we have our own places of worship, but it seems as if we become so scattered in ourselves and not knowing what to do outside of the church when we see so many other white communities and also minority communities establish these means of wealth. And, we wonder how we go for that. That isn't to say that having these institutions is not our goal, but it seems as if we leave the church and we go back to our homes and our morals aren't the same. And when your morals aren't the same as a community, you can't grow from that and you can't generate generational wealth, and that does not reflect in economics for your community. And also with that, I believe that if we spent more time building one another up, not just in a sense of teaching kindness to each other, but if the black community had the same initiative of investing in our schools, investing in our health care, investing in where we are as a government and as a people, we would be able to create those institutions. But I think when we come home to our families and it's just, me, I'm trying to get out of this economic gap that I'm in, so I'm going to send my kids here so that they can do good for themselves. I think that comes out of such a great place, and I know for me in particular, I'm so grateful for my parents for giving me opportunities. But if the black community could be on the same page of, okay, it's not about where you're going to go, but when you get there, realistically, how are you going to give back to your people and your community? Because as you mentioned, so much with the civil rights movement, it didn't matter with Jim Crow, no matter which financial status you were in or what you looked like, how much money you had, that all was reflective upon your race. So I think that if we could change our goals and our morality aspects of going back and investing in our communities, we would see an influx of financial wealth that is propagated within the Black community. But that starts also within what we're learning in the church and what we do outside of the church as well.
Let me to say that, and I agree, is our HBCU, our Black church, our institutions used to be all of that for us. Not universally, but generally. Not every church, not every, but businesses, schools, community resources, planning and organizing, credit unions, investing shared dollars to own businesses. The Black church was doing that. All of those elements were a central part of that institution. However, as our community progressed in certain areas of society, we began to buy into a gospel and a practice that was not our own. And so we began to see a lot more Black churches in really were white churches in blackface. That we lost that communal sense. We lost our desire to do things together, to invest together. And we, to your point, we bought into a gospel that was all about me and not my brother or my sister. And so I think that's the challenge. And our communities are becoming more diverse. And so everybody ain't coming to church. Everybody's not going to be a part of the quote-unquote church institution. But Black people who are a part of the church have to be Christ-centered enough to know that just because you may not believe in Christ, just because you might be a part of this community or that community or whatever the case may be, we still as a people must advance. And I think that exactly is the ball that we've dropped.
Everything revolved around less than 2 square miles, and the school was set on 7 acres. Okay, and we're near the Hermitage. So somewhere on Sunday morning, and by the way, we had the only tavern in East Davidson County and an American Legion. So what did that mean? On Friday, we were the party place. And my daddy told me I couldn't go. But we were really the party place. Yeah. But there was respect and honor in the community for the church and for each other, for children and senior citizens. It was a very different place, and I've talked about that a lot during the years. So you're right, it's hard to get people to go to church because they're not in the community anymore. This used to be a Black community, folks. And for those of you here and for those of you that this was the community. This is not an isolated Black church in the middle of downtown Nashville. People need to understand that. That's the importance of what happened. The National Publishing Board was part of the businesses in this Black community. So you got to understand history. It is very important to understand it, and learn from it, but then to make other history as we have to, based on what we're confronted with and the issues that we see. So we're about 7:10, and we're probably going to move this a little bit. If there's anyone in the audience that's got the spirit and just want to speak, we'll give you a mic as well. And then I'm going to call up Cheryl Mays in about 10 minutes, and she's the chair of our planning committee, to let her close this thing. So yeah, you're on the program. But let me ask you to do something else, and that is, if you could wave a wand. I've heard you talk about church. I've heard you talk about the issues of advocacy and bringing people in. What would it look like? What would justice look like for you?
I think that is such an incredible question. I am pondering this, but I do know if I could wave a wand of justice, it wouldn't have limits. And what I mean by that is more people would know about themselves. And as a writer, I cannot help but bring that back to the media. And that's part of so much of what I do, because within the Mayor's Youth Council, I'm on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and we found it successful. One of our goals, ideally, is raising up a generation where within the media you see people that look like you, people that represent you. So first off, I think that when we erase Eurocentric beauty standards, for example, and so many connotations of the Western world that have put bias limits on what they think we can and can't do, I think that would be tremendous, because once you change your mindset, you change how you live, and you change the outlook on your life. So I think simply that would be one of my first goals. Another very realistic goal that I aspire to dedicate my life's work to personally, because I am an African person, that would be to have our youth more educated, me as well, on Garveyism. Because I think that's become the root of so much of what we need to learn and what we know. And so many young people, especially, black people my age, we express that, but we don't know what to call it because we don't know the terms and we're not as educated in our history. Again, with what you were saying, with book bannings and things like that, that's part of the issue. But I would advocate for more Pan-Africanism, because it is very sad to me that we come from the most genetically diverse and richest and most affluent continent in the entire world, but we don't have a means of how much wealth we really possess. Not only if we live in Africa, but even if we live outside of Africa, and how much potential we have to really invest in our communities here, but also there. If I could, I would allocate money towards the country of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I don't know if you all have seen Black Panther. They literally have a type of element there, a mineral there, and it's known as coltan. And basically what it does is, even on our recordings, it drives our technology, it drives our everything. And I compare it to the vibranium in Black Panther. But the thing is, you wonder, how is the Democratic Republic of the Congo one of the poorest countries in the world when over 40% of coltan comes from there, and that's what's making Apple and Microsoft and all of these technologically advanced companies rich? Well, that's because you have to think, even in the Berlin Conference, it was Western initiatives going back and saying, okay, we're going to overexploit this continent, but then put them in debt for things that we know that they need, and then tell them that they're poor so that their people won't advance. So if I had that magic wand, also note, the people who are digging up the coltan are people who are indigenous to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So they're black folk just like us, doing in the work that are making these companies like Apple in California rich, and then we are, on our phones every day, not even knowing that the reason that we're able to post and do the things that we love are because black people, our brothers and sisters at home, are doing the work. So if I could, and I plan on doing this, hopefully, if everything, with the people that I network in, I want to dedicate my life specifically within having this addressed within Model United Nations, because it is such a profound issue that more people need to know about. So again, first off, media. Kids knowing who they are and being proud of who they are. Secondly, getting the Democratic Republic of the Congo out of debt, because that would shine a light on where we come from. Sadly, we would kind of look towards them, even though we should be already, and saying, wow, we're actually, this is an example of greatness, and this is an example of who we are and what we have. So, but it takes for Garveyism and Pan-Africanism and us investing in them, because once we do, it's going to be incredible. That's what I would do.
Ditto. But I think one wave of justice, and she articulated it well, is freeing ourselves from the concept that white is right. We have lived in respectability politics. We have lived in Eurocentric educational lenses, beauty standards. All of our evaluative measures for success are based on white culture and whiteness. And I think if we are able, with one wave, to find the value, beauty, grace, and who we are, I think that would be wonderful. Then I think the simple teachings of that dark-skinned Palestinian Jew, that if we would love God and love our neighbor as ourselves, we would see a world that would be much different.
I don't want to cut off. This has been incredible. Adrian, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Marvin. And actually, it's a great pairing. We need to bring you all back together, do a program of some sort. One of the things is this vacuum, I think, as you call it, the vacuum of people being able to see and hear and learn from people like you. So it is very important, and those are limited kind of aspects, and we need to figure out how can we buy it, y'all, and sell it, or just give it away, because it's one of those things. And it really is in the spirit of Dr. King that I hear you talking and speaking and all of those things. These are the kinds of things that fuel the movement of the new modern civil rights movement. But there's a new wave of coming. That's what I feel here tonight. So I want to just thank you both for giving us your time, your thoughts, and your energy, and ask that you both be blessed in this work. Because justice work ain't easy. For anyone doing this, it is really not easy. And I think we have to think about what is it that I want to do and how do I want to do it. Some folk might not know who you are. And that's okay, because justice work does not require that you were known. I started off talking about people you don't even know who are responsible for getting us here. And we have to always know that. There are always people out front, and we want to support them, hold them up, and make sure that we have their back. But it is other people willing to step up and do the little things and other things that need to happen. If we didn't have women who went to get people out of jail, and it was women, by the way, who did this. You all knew this.
That's right.
Black women, funded sometimes by their husbands or churches or others who got these students out of jail. We just need to know that. They were drivers and other things. They were active in churches and in their communities. We need to know that there are heroes out here that we don't know, and we need to bring this up. They're continuing to be heroes today. So we just need to know that. Some of us might be seen more than others. Pastors in the pulpit, Adrian's working on the mayor's council. There are others doing great work in this town. We need to just figure out a way to just make sure that if in their communities, that people know who they are. So, yes, sir. Come on up, Dwight. We did not bring up Diane's name. Thank you.
They got to Birmingham, and they were turned back by Bull O'Connor and some of his people. He was the police commissioner there. And what Bull O'Connor, others did, they brought those people who were on the Freedom Riders bus back to Pulaski, Tennessee. And they put them out at the state line, Alabama-Tennessee state line. And Kwame was too young to have participated in the Freedom Rides. But what he did, the call came in that they had been put out, and he was dispatched by Diane Nash to go to Pulaski to bring them back. But he didn't know exactly what house they were in. He had an idea, light was, anyway, he went to the right house and brought those people back, the Freedom Riders back, that had been put out at the state line. And they made it back safely. Had he not been able to get them, there's no telling whether they would have lived. And so Kwame, he was just an unknown hero, but he was a hero. And so you all, learn from others, and you can do your own thing. You know, you can be like a Diane Nash or a Kwame Leo Lillard or a Marion Barry or just so many others. Attorney Fred Gray, who represented Rosa Parks in the Montgomery bus boycott. A lot of people don't know that he went to high school here. He went to the old Nashville Christian Institute. He's from Montgomery, Alabama. His mother sent him here to go to school when he's in about the 8th grade, and represented Martin Luther King, the Tuskegee syphilis studies case. Just got a Presidential Medal of Honor from President Biden back in July. But it's people like that, and we just need to know about. But you all can do it yourselves, and don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it.
And it's grandmas who wrote letters and typed letters, made chicken for folks that they had a meal with them. There's a host of people, and we have to share the name recognition, the desire to be recognized. We have to share that. So that's part of the problem. Everybody can't be the leader. Somebody has to play another role to help move it along. And I think that is a struggle in the work of justice, that everybody wants to be the drum major and nobody wants to be on the drum line. And you can't have a band without one or the other. And so I agree with you that we need to know those stories and celebrate those cloud witnesses and endeavor to be as selfless as they were.
Thank you. Thank you, Dwight. Because I think it's important that names are called and that people know the names of people who made a difference. It was just in churches and everything else. Because at some point I learned most of my life in the church. In a two-room schoolhouse where it was only us. Why am I saying that? Because it's important that we not bury it, we put it in the background. Because it is really important to our existence. And is what will carry us through this, whatever this is. Remember that there are a lot of things going on, and there are a lot of places that people are in, whether it's housing, whether it's helping the homeless. Remember, Dr. King's final days was about cooking. The cooking was moving. So we have to understand that it was really about civil rights for all, and that's something that we need to do. It is really about those of us who look different, because we're still treated differently, and really about other things. So we need to just think about that, think about how is our role. Sometimes it's within the shops where we work, and some of the little stuff makes a difference in our lives and in the lives of others. That's talking to our colleagues and others without sometimes anger. Sometimes anger is necessary, but helping them understand who you are and whose you are. Because the history is what makes this work. So Adrian, Reverend Marlon, thank you for your time. Dwight, thank you for your time and what you're doing for us. Cheryl, we're going to let you come up. But before you do, while you're coming up, let me talk a little bit. I have the agenda. So let me tell everyone about the agenda for IMF that's coming up and where they can find, at least I think I have it. There it is. Tonight was the first of a series of events. The second event is a gala, which is on Thursday, the 12th, and is at the Cal Turner Center in Cary. Friday morning at 8 o'clock, there's going to be a labor human rights breakfast, and it is at Spirit Bennett in Lasky Hall. All of these, the Lasky Hall, human rights is free. There is a price tag to the gala, but you can go find out what that is. There will be a fair housing discussion back at this facility
thank you, thank you.